Today's video, we're going to talk about the new but old Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, regulations that are basically thoroughly affecting the Subaru aftermarket part market. And the tuning community, manufacturers, basically everyone's being affected. We're going to go through everything that you need to know about what's happening with the EPA right now, what's happening with the Clean Air Act, how it affects aftermarket parts availability, and how it affects you guys as a Subaru WRX or STI owner. So hopefully, guys, I'm going to be your resource today on everything you need to know and everything that's coming. We're going to talk about some tuner limitations. I'm also going to tell you guys exactly how the EPA seems to be prosecuting and enforcing the Clean Air Act and what it means for our cars. Before we get too far into the video, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. We do lots of cool automotive stuff here, specifically around Subarus, but we're expanding and doing other things. Definitely consider subscribing if you're interested in that stuff. And guys, this is a little impromptu. I did want to cover this sooner rather than later so you guys know exactly what's going on before all the parts basically disappear and you can't get what you were looking for before. That's why we are out in a snowy situation in front of my WRX. At least it's warm enough today to be outside and not be sitting in the studio. I'm so excited to be here. Okay, so 101, what is going on? Basically, forever now, since I think 1970, there's been the Clean Air Act that has been put into motion and enforced by the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. That's a mouthful. It does a lot of things. And the Clean Air Act isn't just directly about our cars and directly about the exhaust and directly about the catalytic converter. It does a lot of things that are very beneficial for us, and this is a very good thing. The only downside is it does affect our ability to mod our cars. It essentially prohibits the sale, the advertisement for sale, or the installation of any part that changes your vehicle's emissions control devices, i.e. the catalytic converters, or anything that affects the catalytic converters. And if you know these cars at all, that was a very broad statement. I bet you it's intentionally broad in the Clean Air Act itself so that the EPA can enforce as they see fit as time goes on and as things develop and as new things come to market and these cars change, and these cars are constantly changing, especially when you think about when this language was written decades ago. Things have changed and people are finding different loopholes and workarounds to that and a lot of things. You've probably heard all over Facebook groups, Reddit, YouTube even, that, oh my goodness, there's new EPA laws that are gonna keep me from getting parts that I want, specifically things like catless J-pipes, TGV and EGR deletes, all those wonderful things when you think about the tuning of this vehicle. Well, maybe not the catless J-pipe, I don't know how I exactly feel about that, but it's a very common part that people are looking for. So before we get too far into exactly what parts you're gonna be missing out on in the soon-to-be future, let's talk a little bit about what's actually happening and how the EPA is enforcing it. Well, you must have noticed that they are really becoming much more strict on their enforcement, and they are making new interpretations of what the Clean Air Act actually says, which are affecting companies, and specifically they're going at the manufacturers right now. So historically, we've seen the EPA enforce the Clean Air Act with cars by civil suits, sometimes criminal suits, but mainly against installers, tuners, sometimes exhaust manufacturers, because they're fighting directly against catalytic converters and the removal of catalytic converters. But we haven't seen anything too serious. Now, in the past 5 or so years, it's been ramping up, enforcement's getting stricter and stricter and stricter, but no one's gone straight to basically all the manufacturers and basically delivered a blanket threat. The most recent and the most notable cases and fines against big manufacturers that you may know were in 2019. MagnaFlow in California was fined $612,000 and some change for selling about 5,600 units, I think around that, of exhausts for diesel trucks that effectively eliminated the catalytic converter. And that was the first big turning point of what we're seeing right now. And just shortly after that, or roughly at the same time, Flowmaster was hit with a $270,000 fine for doing roughly the same. So in the past 3 years, those have been main turning points where you've seen the EPA go from a mix of tuners, manufacturers, aftermarket support, installers mainly. They've been hitting a lot of civil cases against installers, to going straight to the manufacturer, to massive names. Now, MagnaFlow and Flowmaster are huge industry names, and they're responsible for a massive portion of the exhausts coming out of the US and going into your cars. Now, it's not specific to the Subaru platform, but that was the catalyst to what we're seeing now. They've gone and attacked the first manufacturers, and I think personally it was something of a test case to see whether or not strict enforcement and fines directly to the major producers were going to be successful, how much backlash was going to happen, and basically what happened was nothing. They got fined, they stopped selling it, and there was no backlash to the EPA. Well, some people were mad. Obviously, those companies were mad. but it didn't have long-term ramifications to the industry, to everything, so they kept going. Another notable change that's happened not too long ago, but APR, biggest tuner and aftermarket support for the VW platform and the Audi platform, big name, APR, had to stop selling, making, and installing catless downpipes and eventually stopped offering their Stage 2 off-the-shelf tuning. This is a massive deal as well. Obviously not for our market. Many of you guys might actually say, boo to the GTI, good for them, like sucks to suck. We've got the Subaru WRX. Well, it's coming to us too, unfortunately. I've now seen a couple of cases where they've gone at big manufacturers and some of the biggest performance part and tuners for a platform. Well, it looks like the Subaru WRX and STI are next on the chopping block, unfortunately, or generally just the Subaru aftermarket market. That's a little bit about what's happening overall with EPA. They're getting stricter on the enforcement, they're getting stricter on fines, and they're starting to search a little bit more. But how does that affect our community and you buying parts? Essentially, the EPA is doing the same thing that they did with MagnaFlow, Flowmaster, and they're going after manufacturers that are providing parts for the Subaru platform, and they're going at tuners. Now, they've been pushing tuners for a long time, and you'll know this specifically when you post on Facebook or something, or you see a post on Facebook for a catless downpipe tuner. None of the tuners actually respond, none of them advertise it, and it's because if the EPA is aware that they're actually tuning a catless platform, they are well open to criminal and civil suits, and it's not just for your one tune, it's for every tune they've provided under the Clean Air Act. Essentially, we're seeing the end of an era and the end of availability to catless downpipes. That's the first thing. We're not going to see those anymore. Anyone that makes them and ships them and installs them is going to get in a lot of trouble. They're likely going to get fines, and that's just because the EPA is cracking down. Catless downpipes have been illegal forever, but they've been labeled as off-road use or race-only use. And essentially what the EPA is doing is it's cracking down on parts that are labeled that, and parts that are only labeled that if they violate the Clean Air Act. Now, you might say there are a few other things that do that, like suspension parts. Let's just talk performance right now, because performance is really what's in question. If you're looking at a part that's labeled off-road use or race-only use, you can assume that that part is no longer going to be manufactured, for the most part. A few things might come through, and there might be some labeling, but for the most part, that's what we're going to see. Of course, that's the catless J-pipes. That's also going to be TGV deletes and EGR deletes and any type of TGV or EGR work in general. And what's unfortunate is that's also most headers. A big change that you're seeing is headers with external wastegates are basically disappearing off the market. You know, I believe it's Killer B is basically saying no more, which is a huge bummer. And I know people have been asking everywhere about them, so the used ones are going to go way up in price, but we're going to see a very similar thing, that if you're caught with the used ones, or you put used ones on, or somebody installs them for you, the installer's potentially going to get in a lot of trouble, and the tuner's probably going to get into some trouble, and you could potentially get in some trouble. California has already been hit hard for this, and if you live in California, you already know what a lot of these things are like. I mean, you haven't been able to ship any of this stuff to California in ages. Sometimes you can still get TGV and EGR stuff in California, especially like off eBay, and I know a few companies are still selling it off eBay, but essentially every major performance parts company and retailer has taken these things off their sites because they could get fined, and there's no set date from my understanding, and that could change of when they're going to get fined or when it's going to happen. You know, it's been an ongoing enforcement, and it's just getting stricter. So it's not like there's been an ultimatum, essentially. It's just been, we're enforcing it stronger. You can see that's been happening. I'm sure people are getting contacted by the EPA, because I'm sure they give a warning, and you know, if they ask you to stop and you stop, they're not going to pursue it further. So I guess my main takeaway here is, if you are interested in ever running a catless downpipe, you ever have interest in TGV or EGR deletes, now is the time to do it. Now is the time to privately reach out to your tuners, and now is the time to pursue that avenue. I know all of you guys that are running with warranties and wanted your warranties to kind of expire or drive through your warranties, you might be bummed with me saying that, but it's just your reality, and it's just what you're going to have to do if you want those parts eventually on your car. That said, catted downpipes are still okay, but the language is so unclear that it's not very clear where this is all going in the future. 5 years from now, we could find out that J-pipes in general, catted or not, are not allowed on these cars, and you guys are going to roast me in the comment sections for me saying that. In reality, they're kind of not compliant with the Clean Air Act. Now, people are going to argue that they are, but it is the responsibility of each manufacturer to get approval and prove to the EPA that it is compliant, and that is an incredibly hard thing to do. And if we get forced into that kind of form, all those parts are going to become vastly more expensive, and modifying these cars are going to become a much more expensive and hard to get into platform, and just hard to be part of community. Well guys, I hope I provided you guys some information here. I know this video was a little bit all over the place because there were so many things to discuss, from the EPA, what they're doing, what it means, to how they're enforcing it, to the parts that are being affected, to the Subaru community. I'm gonna have a follow-up video shortly, maybe in a month or two, when we hear more and when we actually see some of the parts clear off shelves, and if we see any fines and civil suits or possibly criminal suits, because that is not out of the question, to tuners, part companies, retailers. I will be sure to cover them and update you guys. Just make sure that you are staying safe with your cars. If you're interested again in getting these things, make sure you look now. Like again, if you guys wanted Killer B headers with the external wastegate, that is something to look for now. From my understanding, those are going to be no more. Catless downpipes, there are so many out in the market, you'll eventually be able to get them used, but finding a tuner a year from now might be very hard. And of course we know you can't run catless downpipes without a very specific tune, or it could be very bad for your engine. I will come out with a video, guys, don't worry, about catless versus catted J-pipes and why I run a catted J-pipe and will probably never run a catless J-pipe. There's a lot of reasons never to run them, but some people like the sheer noise. And so with that, guys, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, thank you for being here, stay safe, and have a great day.